speakers and everyone who present today. As an opposition team, we against firmly with this motion. This house regrets the dominance of globalized fantasy franchises in shaping the imagination of youth in developing countries. Now let's take a look at the current status quo uh, as POV from the opposition team. Right now, it is true that globalized fantasy franchises like Marvel, Disney, and anime are very dominant among the youth in developing countries, right? Young people spend a lot of time watching these movies, shows, or reading comics, and these stories shape their imaginations. But this dominance doesn't mean local culture disappears. In fact, local tradition, folklore, and creative work still exist and can coexist with global influences. What we see instead is that global franchises often inspire the youth by teaching them new values like teamwork, courage, or justice, while also motivating them to create their own local content. So, in the current status quo, the presence of global franchises is not destroying local identity, but rather giving young people more choices and more sources of inspirations. Now, let me respond to the government cases first. They bring two arguments here. Firstly, about global franchises create unrealistic fantasies for youth. The proposition said that these stories promote unrealistic freedom or carelessness that young youth in the developing countries cannot have. But this is not necessarily harmful. In fact, fantasy and imaginations are important tools for young people to dream bigger and think creatively. Even if these stories are unrealistic, they spark curiosity and inspire innovations. For example, anime like Doraemon, for example, has inspired many young people to think about futuristic inventions and technologies, right? Instead of trapping them in false ideals, global franchises can actually push youth to create something new in real life. And then goes to the second argument brought by the government is about this fosters insecurity among youth. The proposition argued that seeing global franchises makes young people insecure because they compare themselves to idealized heroes or stories. But this is not automatic. In many cases, fandom culture gives youth a safe space to express themselves. For example, through cosplay, fan art, or online communities. Young people actually gain confidence and find friends with similar interests rather than making them insecure. These franchises often empower them to be more creative and socially. And our goal, as the opposition team, our goal here is to show that globalized fantasy franchises do not harm youth in developing countries, but instead help them grow. This story sparks imagination and creativity, allowing young people to dream bigger than their immediate reality. They also provide positive lessons about courage, friendships, and resilience, which can inspire youth in their own lives. Moreover, fandom culture creates safe spaces for self expressions from cosplay to art and even opens opportunities in creative industries. And then let's move on to our two main arguments here. First, about globalized fantasy franchise boost youth creativity. We believe that the dominance of globalized fantasy franchises should not be regretted because it actually increases creativity among youth, especially through fandom culture. The important question is, why does creativity matter for young people, especially in developing countries? Creativity is not just about hobbies, right? It is about building problem solving skills, confidence, and innovation that can be applied in real life. If youth are only told to follow strict rules or live in limitations, they may lose the ability to imagine better futures. Fantasy franchises giving them a safe space to dream and create without fear of judgment. This is important because imagination often leads to real world progress, right? Many innovations today were born from what used to be considered fantasy. For example, fandom culture encourages young people to make fan art, write fan fictions, or join cosplay, right? Drawing fan art improves artistic ability and creativity, while cosplay requires skills like makeup and performance, right? These activities are not just for fun. They help develop practical skills and can even lead to careers in creative industries like design, media, or entertainment, for example. If we compare in a world without these globalized fantasy franchises, young people would have fewer shared platforms to express themselves and connect globally. Their imagination might stay limited within the local content without the push to explore and innovate. Therefore, instead of being harmful, globalized fantasy franchises empower youth to innovate, create, and express themselves in many ways that are meaningful for their personal and professional developments in the future. Goes to our second argument is about inspiring innovation for national progress. We do not regret this dominance because globalized fantasy franchises inspire youth to imagine innovation that can help advance their own countries. Why is this important? Because innovation starts from imagination, right? If young people never see new ideas, how can they dream of creating something better for their country, right? Globalized fantasy franchises ensure this by showing futuristic technology, for example, advanced societies, and creative problem solving in the real life. This exposure pushes youth in developing countries to ask themselves, like, oh, if it's possible in the stories, why not in real life? Without this kind of inspirations, many youths might remain stuck in the limited thinking, only accepting the reality they already see, right? For example, like Marvel's Iron Man inspired many engineering students worldwide to explore robotics and artificial intelligence, for example. An anime like Doraemon, for example, made children dream of inventions that solve everyday problems, right? If this franchise were absent, youth in developing countries would have fewer opportunities to be exposed to futuristic possibilities, and their imaginations might stay confined to traditional or existing ideas. Thus, these franchises do not weaken youth imaginations, but they strengthen it. By sparking innovative ideas, they help prepare the next generations to contribute more to their country's growth. In conclusion, we do not regret the dominance of globalized fantasy franchises. Instead of limiting imaginations, they expand it by giving youth new worlds and ideas to explore, right? These stories inspire creativity, innovations, and even national progress at the end of the day, while also providing safe communities like fandoms where youth can express themselves. If we remove this influence, youth in developing countries risk losing valuable sources of inspirations and motivations. That is why we proudly stand against the motion. Thank you.